Hey Spain lovers, James Blick here. Now, anyone who knows me well knows that after food, my second love is history. And when I moved to Madrid 9 years ago from New Zealand, a relatively young country, I fell in love with the history of Madrid and of Spain. I began to devour it. So today I'm going to take you on my highlights of historic Madrid walking tour. I'm going to show you my favorite key sites, tell you the stories behind them. I'm going to take you to some secret stops as well that I love and not many people know about. And I'm going to try and make it interesting because I know history can be boring, but I'm going to do my best. So venga, let's go.
Madrid is such a fascinating city to explore. Sprawling plazas, historic restaurants, grand palaces, hidden corners, dark stories of missing bodies, and shocking tales of the Spanish Inquisition. The history of the Spanish capital has it all. Today we're going to cover over 1,100 years of history. So grab a cup of coffee or a glass of vermouth and settle in.
And what better place to start than exactly where it all began, right here in front of Madrid's Royal Palace, because this is exactly where my adopted city was founded. And first things first, this palace is the largest still functioning royal palace in the world. Now, the king and queen don't live here, but it's still used for official ceremonies. Now, see if you can guess how many rooms they have in this palace. Look, nobody knows for sure. It's between 2,800, I've read 3,400, nobody's quite sure. But it's enormous. And here's an important date. Nobody has lived in this palace since 1931. Hold on to that date, it'll come up again later. So I said Madrid was founded here, but when and by who? You might have heard of the Moors. That was a mixture of Berbers and Arab elite who were living in northern Morocco and invaded Spain in the 8th century. And they built here in the 9th century a fortress, a defensive castle. Now the Christians were battling to retake Spain, what's called the reconquest of Spain. But they built this here because they could see the mountains to the north, and that way they could see the Christians driving over the mountains, the Guadarrama mountains. But look, the Christians did come, and in the 11th century they captured the fortress, they captured what was the military outpost, and then installed themselves in the fortress, and Madrid began to grow as more of a village, of a town. But you're probably thinking, James, this doesn't look anything like a 9th century Moorish fortress. So what happened? Well, what happened is in 1734, the fortress, it caught fire. Supposedly a candle in the artist's studio fell over and it burned for 4 days. Well, we lost the building, but it was full of wonderful artworks because the kings and queens of Spain had been great collectors of the arts, and they were throwing the artworks out the windows to save it. And the basis of what today is the collection in the Prado is effectively the art that was saved from the burning palace or burning fortress. And then they built this guy in the 18th century, which is kind of a little bit sort of French, a little bit Italian. To be honest, not my favorite palace in the world, but if you visit it, the armory is very, very cool. Okay, and before we head off, let me tell you about this guy up on the horse. This is Philip IV. He was a king who lived in the old palace, the one that burnt down. And see, he wanted a sculpture of himself on a horse with the horse rearing up on its hind legs. So he got his sculptor, an Italian guy called Tacca, to do it. But Tacca couldn't figure out how to do it because nobody had been doing sculptures in Europe with men on horses where the horse was effectively balanced on its hind legs. What looks simple today was really hard at the time. So I love this story. Tacca wrote to a friend of his, a fellow Italian, and you'll have heard of this guy, Galileo Galilei. And Galileo gave him the exact equation of the angle of the horse and told him how to construct the sculpture so that the horse would be balanced. Here's what he said. You've got to balance it on 3 points at the back, which means the 2 legs and the tail. And he also said the front had to be hollow and the back had to be solid. And Galileo said that if you do it like that, it will stand forever. And so far so good. Almost 400, 300 and a bit years later? No, 400, 300 and a bit years later, still going. So here in the Plaza de Ramales is one of the hidden little secrets of Madrid that not many people know about. So this might look like a quiet little square with a few tapas bars and terraces, but right now we're standing in the middle of what was once a church that was here. You can see these outlines here. They look like little benches for people to sit on, but it's actually the outline of a church that was here for hundreds of years until it was knocked down in 1810. Okay, so we knocked down the church, we lost an old building, but what else did we lose? But you'll see that someone really famous was buried here. You see, in 1660, Spain's most famous court painter, most famous painter, Diego de Velázquez, was buried here. Now, he's the guy whose works you're going to see in the Prado, like Las Meninas, the most famous artwork in the Prado is his, and he was buried beneath this church in the crypt. Now, in 1810, when they knocked the church down, they forgot to take him out before they did that, and so we lost any record of where his body was. Now, over the centuries, we've searched for Diego de Velázquez, including in 1999 was the last time they looked for him here. They were digging for months, and they couldn't find him. So we don't know where he is. And I tell you what, that's not the only famous missing Spanish body I'm going to tell you about today. I often say to people, don't die while you're in Madrid, because we might lose you. And I love this little grassy knoll or nook that's up above the palace beside Calle del Factor. Not many people come up here, and it's a great place to get photos and to get views of the royal palace, of the cathedral, and then in behind is the Casa del Campo. Now that's a huge public park now, but back in the day it was the king's old hunting grounds. Fascinating thing about the cathedral behind me is it took 110 years to build. Now, that would be normal when you're thinking 15th, 16th century, but it was finished only in 1993. Civil wars, bankruptcy, poverty all got in the way, and that's why it took so long to build. And now, yeah, if you're wandering around, head up here. Not many people know about this spot. And if you're wandering around the Calle Mayor, you might turn a corner and see this guy. In fact, he's often given me a fright when I've been walking around here at night. You think he's real. He's not, but he looks very real. And he's called the Curious Neighbor. Now, what's he so curious about? What's he looking at? Well, there's not much to see, but beneath here are the remains of an old church that was knocked down when the Calle Mayor, the main street, was built. And here's the thing, that church was built on the remains of a mosque. Because remember, the Moors founded Madrid, and this was where their main mosque was. And something you need to know, if you touch his bum, it's good luck. If you're a little bit prudish, you can touch his shoulder. Not quite as good luck. So I love walking around this old part of Madrid around the palace. It's called Barrio de los Austrias, or Hapsburg Madrid. And this is the part that was really built up and important when the Habsburgs were in power. I'm talking about the guy on the horse, Philip IV, his son, Charles II. Now here's the thing, you're going to see paintings of these guys in the Prado. And when you look at them, you're going to think they look kind of funny looking people. That's because they were so inbred. The dynasty effectively died out in the year 1700 because the last in the line, Charles II, couldn't have any children because he was so inbred. There's so many stories about how he was kind of, poor guy, kind of funny looking, couldn't walk properly, couldn't talk properly. His 8 great-grandparents were descended from the same woman, and her name was Joanne the Insane. So that gives you an idea of the kind of bloodline. And so tucked into the Hapsburg neighborhood is this San Nicolas Church, or St. Nicholas Church. It's from the 12th century, the 1100s, and it's the oldest church in Madrid that's still standing. And what I find fascinating about this is, look at that bell tower. Does it remind you of something? It kind of makes you think of Andalusia, of the Moors, of the Moorish architecture. Now, there may have been a mosque here as well, and the minaret was there, but also in the 12th century, the Christians were copying a lot of that Moorish style of architecture because it was in fashion, and so it's called mudéjar style. So very, very cool. A great little spot to discover. And now we're walking into one of my favorite little squares, La Plaza de la Villa, which literally means town square or village square a little bit. And what's so interesting about this square is that almost 500 years ago, when Madrid was the capital of a global empire, this was one of the most important squares, if not the most important in the city. So what I find fascinating about the square are the 3 buildings that surround it, each from a different century. So let me geek out for a sec. This guy up here was the Madrid Town Hall from 1693 right up until 2007, and then it got a little small. That's over 300 years. You'll notice the sloping roof. So this is Habsburg architecture, and the Habsburgs were from Austria. In Austria it snows a lot, so that architecture, that sloping roof is so the snow can fall off. Doesn't snow much in Madrid. So if that's a 17th century building, if you swing it around a little bit, Yoli, down the back we have a building from the 16th century, and then over on the far side of the square you've got a building from the 15th century, one of the oldest still standing buildings in Madrid. You can see the style is much simpler from the old town hall in the 17th century. And what I find interesting about this really simple building is if you look up at the top, you've got these arches, these horseshoe-shaped arches, which again look like that Moorish style. It wasn't built by the Moors, but it was the Christians copying that style, the mudéjar style. So it was just fashionable at the time. All right, before we head into the most narrow street in Madrid, I want to tell you about this guy up here. So this guy up here on the statue is Álvaro de Bazán. Now he was the guy who was in charge initially of the famous Spanish Armada's invasion or attempted invasion of England in the 16th century. This guy was a great strategist, but he died a few months before the invasion, and the guy that the king appointed to take over was not such a good strategist and in fact suffered from seasickness. So the invasion of England was a complete disaster. But there's historians who say that if this guy had have lived, maybe us Kiwis, English people, Australians, anybody descendant from England would today be speaking Spanish. I love this extremely narrow street. You can almost touch the sides. So suddenly all the noise disappears, the noise of the Calle Mayor, and you're lost here in these old winding streets. And that's what I love about walking around old Madrid, that you'll turn a corner, it will become silent and so mysterious and wonderful. Such a great place to explore. So just at the top of Calle Cavabaja, that famous tapa street that I made a video about, you'll see on the wall this little slogan, which if you don't speak Spanish, you won't know what it means. Fui sobre agua edificada mis muros de fuego son. What it means is, over water my walls of fire were built. And this is a very old motto of Madrid going back centuries. And it refers to the fact that Madrid long ago, and maybe still today, I'm not quite sure, had underground aquifers running beneath it. In fact, the name Madrid possibly comes from an Arabic word meaning place of life-giving water, because remember, the founders of Madrid spoke Arabic. So that's why it's over water. But what are these walls of fire that it refers to? Well, that's because the old medieval walls of Madrid ran through here, and they were made with flint. And when an arrow hits flint, it sparks. So that's walls of fire. So over water, my walls of fire were built. That's Madrid for you. And guys, we're just about to walk past Botín, the oldest still running restaurant in the world. I'll link to a video above that I made about the oldest restaurants in Madrid that you can check out. So we're now entering the square that you have to visit while you're here in Madrid. Everyone visits it, Plaza Mayor. Now, but let me give you some context on what this grand square is all about, because it's more than just a big square. It really speaks to the history of Madrid. So remember in the 11th century when the Christians captured what was then a military fortress, it kind of began to grow into a town, but it was always pretty small. But in 1561, Philip II, the King of Spain, decided something huge. He decided to make Madrid his capital. And a capital needs a big square, so Philip II decided to design this, the Plaza Mayor, for his new capital of the Spanish Empire. And there's a lot that's gone on here. And so all these benches that are in the square have images of all the things that have happened here over the years. So this one shows the bullfights that used to happen here before Madrid had its bull ring. Over here you can see a fire that happened. There's been 3 different fires in the square over the centuries. There's only one building that's original, and the other buildings have been built after the fact because of these fires. And tucked in here behind this woman feeding her baby, as you can see, images of the Inquisition. There were Inquisition trials here. Autos de fe were effectively the people who'd been convicted by the Spanish Inquisition were brought here, and they had to repent for their sins. Now, here is the thing. If you repented for your sins, you were given mercy, which means you were strangled and then burned outside the city walls. If you didn't repent, you just went straight outside the city walls and you were burned alive. So yeah, kind of a dark history that's happened here in the Plaza Mayor, but also lots of good things. Now it's the Christmas market as we lead up to Christmas. So a little bit of yin and yang, a little bit of dark and light. That's Madrid, that's Spain, right? That's Spanish history. It's what I love about it. Now I mentioned there have been 3 fires over the centuries here in the square, and the only building that remains from the 17th century is this one, the Casa de la Panadería. Originally, this is where all the bread was baked in the city to keep prices for bread stable. Nowadays, it's the Tourist Information Center. But what you should do is if you come to Madrid, you need to check out these murals. They look like they're hundreds of years old, and they're not. They're only 2 or 3 decades, and they have wonderful mythological symbols in them. And see if you can find the cats running up the tower when you come, because that's a reference to Madrid, because if you're a 3rd generation Madrileño or Madrileña, you're called a cat. So yeah, lots hidden in these murals. Okay, we're gonna leave the Plaza Mayor and we're gonna go to another famous square which has a very different history. This square, the Puerta del Sol, is the square of the people. It's long been a place of gathering where people came to meet each other, a place of protest. It was once lined with lots of cafes, and this building up behind me was once the post office, the source of all news. In fact, there's a saying that the news of an event reaches the Puerta del Sol before the event has even happened. And people used to come here to get gossip of what was happening in the city. Of all those famous old cafes, one still remains, La Mallorquina. I made a video which mentions it, and they have a delicious Napolitana. You have to try it while you're here. And as I say, it's long been a place of protest here in the Puerta del Sol, all the way from the beginning of the 19th century, where the Madrileños rose up against the French occupying troops. You'll see paintings about that from famous Goya in the Prado, even to Occupy Madrid. You might think that the Occupy movement started in Wall Street, but no, it started right here in the Puerta del Sol in 2011. So the people behind me taking their photos, standing on a plaque on the square and actually queuing to have their photo taken, they're queuing up for the Kilometer Zero plaque, because this is where all the radial roads throughout Spain, the main highways, are measured from, because this was the post office back in the day. Nowadays, they say if you stand on that plaque, you will return. So when you're here, make sure you stand on it. Hopefully there's not going to be a queue when you're here though, so I'm not going to do it this time. And this clock up on the building behind us, this is the clock that everyone in Spain is watching at midnight on New Year's Eve. The square fills up and people are here with 12 grapes. And as the clock chimes 12 chimes just before we hit midnight, you eat a grape with each chime. And literally, I've been here in the square, it's packed. I've been sitting at Yoli's parents' place watching the TV, watching this, and all over Spain, everyone's watching this clock, and it's kind of like Times Square, I guess. So yeah, the Puerta del Sol, the People's Square, where it all happens. And this guy up here with the big nose, he's a Bourbon. He's from the same dynasty as the current king of Spain. Now, this guy was a king in the 18th century, and when he arrived into Madrid, he was like, this place is kind of dirty, it needs some tidying up. So he paved the streets, he put in street lighting, hired street sweepers, but a lot of Madrileños fought back. They didn't want it to happen. They didn't want him to tidy up their city. So he said, can I just do a few streets and see what you think? He did a few streets and they loved it. After that, he said, the Madrileños, the people from Madrid, are like little children. They cry when you wash their face. So if you need a little pit stop during your historic route, check out this place, La Casa del Abuelo. They're famous for their prawns. I actually made a video about them, which I'll link to above, but also they have an interesting history. This place is over 100 years old, and way back in the 20s and 30s, they were known for their sandwiches. It was also a shop. But then when the Spanish Civil War came in 1936, there was a bread shortage in Madrid. And so the owner of this place, El Abuelo, the grandfather, went down to the market and bought the cheapest thing he could find, prawns, and he started mixing them up with garlic and parsley and made this delicious gambas al ajillo dish, which they still do today. And so I love how the gastronomy of this place, the dish they serve, comes right out of a bread shortage in the Spanish Civil War. And speaking of the Spanish Civil War, there's someone I want you to meet. So this is my favorite statue in all of Madrid, here in the Plaza Santa Ana. It's Federico Garcia Lorca, a very famous Spanish playwright and poet, and I just love the way he's holding that bird. And mystery surrounds the end of his life. He was murdered in 1936 at the outbreak of the Spanish Civil War, and his body was buried somewhere near Granada. They've searched for him multiple times and still haven't found it. He was killed either because he was gay or because of his left-leaning views. This was a very dramatic time in the country's history. So remember I told you way back at the beginning at the Royal Palace that palace was last inhabited in 1931? Well, that's because in 1931 Spain became a republic, and it was quite a liberal republic. Church and state were separated. In 1933 women were given the vote, but 31 to 36 was a very tumultuous time in Spanish history. The left and the right were pulling on each other. There was a lot of chaos, and in 1936 Franco, a general in the army, staged a coup to take over the republic and sort of pull Spain back into its more traditional past. And that coup failed and became the Spanish Civil War, 1936 to 1939. And so in 1936, at the outbreak of that civil war, he was murdered and his body was buried somewhere, again, a missing body. Like Velázquez, we have no idea where it is. And he's here because here in the Plaza Santa Ana is the entry point to the Barrio de las Letras, or Huertas, the literary quarter, the area where so many famous writers have lived and died. And I'm going to introduce you to another one in a moment who's also missing. Before we head off, I want to tell you about this building behind me. So presiding over the Plaza Santa Ana is this grand hotel. Now this hotel was where the bullfighters famously used to come and get dressed before bullfights. Manolete, the most famous bullfighter of the 20th century, used to come here and get his suit on before going to the bull ring. And also he would sleep here, always in the same room. And this square is a much more peaceful square compared to the Plaza Mayor or the Puerta del Sol. So if you want to come and just hang out, there's a children's playground, have a drink. It's really nice to sit in the sun. All right, let's dive into the Barrio de las Letras. So the most famous Spanish author who lived here in Huertas, or in the literary quarter, was Miguel de Cervantes. He lived here in the 16th and 17th century, and he wrote, well, see if you can guess, Don Quixote, the man from La Mancha, the man who was tilting at windmills, fighting giants with his sidekick Sancho Panza. And he lived here in 3 different houses, always renting, always a poor artist, never owned his own house, which is, typical of any kind of artist, I guess. And then we're going to go down and see where he might be buried. It's all a bit unclear and a bit vague. Remember, we lose bodies here in Madrid. So Cervantes was buried in this Trinitarian convent in 1616, the year he died. Interesting, it's the same year that Shakespeare died. He was buried here, or he wanted to be buried here, because the Trinitarian order actually paid his ransom to get him out of prison when he was a POW in Algiers for 5 years. So really interesting background, Cervantes. He was a soldier as well before he was a famous writer. And so he was buried here, and then over the years they kind of reformed the convent a little bit, did some renovation works, and they lost his body. Now, suddenly in 2011, a historian said that he was going to look for him. He wanted to do a study to see if they could trace his body and then go inside and dig. And then in 2015, they turned up a piece of wood from a coffin that had nails spelling MC into it. And so everyone thought, we've found Miguel de Cervantes' body, he's in here. Well, there was a little bit of doubt. Another historian said maybe it said MG, and that maybe it wasn't as old as Cervantes was when he was buried here. And so in the end, they did declare that they had found pieces of Cervantes' remains, but there was a little bit of skepticism from other historians. So it all kind of just dissipated a little bit, and I'm not quite sure if we found him or not. But anyway, you can never get into this place anyway to see where he might be. So it's kind of part of the beauty of the mystery of Madrid. Did we find Cervantes? Did we not? Does it really matter? So guys, if you keep walking down the hill at the bottom of the literary quarter, you'll hit the Prado Museum. Now, that is a place you have to visit when you're here in Madrid. And my favorite artist in the Prado is Goya, Francisco de Goya. For me, the greatest Spanish painter. Now, we do know where Goya's body is. It's down by the Madrid's river. But he died in Bordeaux in the 1820s. And in the later 19th century, when they decided to dig him up and bring him home, guess what? His head was missing. Where's his head? Who knows? And before you hit the Prado, you're probably hungry by now after all this historic walking. You need to grab a bite. So guys, check out all the videos on this channel. There's plenty of videos on where to eat in Madrid, Barcelona, Seville, videos from all over Spain. And I hope we'll see you in the next video. Hasta luego, ciao.